Police officers, what's the strangest crime someone tried to report? I'd been a cop for 12 years and thought I'd seen everything until Margaret Finley walked into the station on a Thursday morning carrying what looked like a homemade science fair project. She was probably in her mid-50s, wearing a purple tracksuit and orthopedic sneakers, and she had this determined expression that immediately told me this was going to be a long shift. She marched straight up to the front desk, set down her contraption with a loud thunk, and announced that she needed to report a crime of unprecedented severity. The desk sergeant, Davis, asked what kind of crime. She looked him dead in the eye and said, "Gravitational assault. My upstairs neighbor is manipulating the laws of physics in my apartment, and I have proof." Davis glanced at me with that "please help me" look, so I volunteered to take her statement, thinking it would be a quick psychiatric referral and I could get back to actual police work. I had no idea I was about to spend the next 6 hours in the most surreal experience of my career. Margaret followed me to an interview room, carefully carrying her device like it was the Hope Diamond. Once we sat down, she immediately launched into her complaint without any prompting. "Officer, for the past 3 months, objects in my apartment have been falling incorrectly. At first, I thought I was imagining it, but then I started documenting everything." She pulled out a 3-ring binder that had to be 4 inches thick, labeled Gravity Anomaly Log, in neat handwriting. I opened it to find pages and pages of entries, each describing when and where something fell, with timestamps down to the second. August 3rd, 2:14 p.m., dropped coffee mug in kitchen, fell at wrong angle. August 5th, 9:22 a.m., pen rolled off table too slowly. August 7th, 6:45 p.m., phone slipped from hand, hit floor with insufficient force. The entries went on for nearly 100 pages, each one documenting what she believed were gravitational irregularities. I asked her what she meant by wrong angle and too slowly, and she said that's where her device came in. She placed the contraption on the table between us. It was a spirit level that had been modified with what looked like fishing weights, magnets, copper wire, and several small compasses hot glued to the sides. There was also a digital thermometer taped to it and what appeared to be a small radio antenna sticking out the top. "This is a gravitational field detector," she explained with complete seriousness. "I built it using principles from multiple YouTube videos about electromagnetic fields and gravitational waves. When gravity is being manipulated, the magnets react to the distortion and the compasses spin." I asked her to demonstrate. She set the device on the table and we both stared at it. Nothing happened. She frowned and tapped it a few times. "It only works in my apartment where the interference is occurring. That's how I know the attack is targeted specifically at my living space." I was already mentally composing the referral paperwork when she said something that made me pause. "The manipulation always happens when my upstairs neighbor, Leonard Briggs, is home, never when he's away." I asked if she'd had any disputes with this neighbor. Her face flushed. "He complained about my wind chimes last year, said they kept him awake. I told him they were for spiritual energy flow and he said that was nonsense. 2 weeks later, the gravity problems started." She pulled out another folder, this one containing what she claimed were gravitational readings she'd taken in her apartment. These were hand-drawn graphs showing fluctuations in something she called G-force density over time. The graphs were surprisingly detailed, with different colored pens marking different rooms and times of day. "See this spike here? That's when I dropped my keys and they fell sideways instead of straight down. And this valley? That's when my cat jumped off the counter and seemed to float for an extra second. I gently suggested that keys don't fall sideways and cats are just good at landing." She shook her head vigorously. "Not like this. I have video evidence." She pulled out her phone and showed me a video of her dropping a set of keys in her kitchen. They fell to the floor in what appeared to be a completely normal fashion. "Do you see it?" she asked urgently. "They fell at approximately 9.7 meters per second squared instead of the standard 9.8. That's a 1% deviation from normal gravity." I asked how she calculated that. She'd apparently filmed multiple objects falling in slow motion and counted the frames to determine fall speed, then compared them to what she found in physics textbooks. The math was actually impressive in its complexity, even though the premise was insane. She had spreadsheets showing fall times for everything from pencils to oranges, all carefully measured and analyzed. The variations are consistent with localized gravitational manipulation using technology I believe Leonard has installed in his apartment. I asked what kind of technology could do that. She leaned in conspiratorially. "That's what I need you to investigate. Obviously, it's some kind of device that generates a gravitational field strong enough to affect the floor below him." I explained that such technology didn't exist, at least not in any form that could be hidden in an apartment. She pulled out printed articles about CERN, gravitational waves, and something about anti-gravity research from the 1960s. "The government has been suppressing this technology for decades, but you can buy components online if you know where to look. I believe Leonard is either a physicist conducting illegal experiments, or he's been recruited by someone to test this technology on an unwitting subject, me." She showed me more videos, probably 20 of them, all showing normal objects falling normally. In each one, she provided breathless narration about the abnormal trajectory, or suspicious acceleration rate that I simply couldn't see. One video showed her cat knocking a glass off the counter. "Pause it right there," she insisted. "See how the water separates into droplets? That dispersion pattern is wrong. The gravitational field is being disrupted at the molecular level. I tried a different approach and asked if she'd considered talking to Leonard directly about these concerns. Her expression darkened. I tried once. He laughed at me, said I should see a doctor, but I know what I'm experiencing is real, and his dismissive attitude proves he's hiding something. She pulled out photographs of Leonard's apartment door. I've been monitoring his comings and goings. He works irregular hours, sometimes leaving at 3 a.m. and returning at odd times. Classic behavior for someone conducting secret experiments. The photos were time-stamped and organized chronologically, showing Leonard leaving and entering his apartment at various times over several weeks. It was honestly impressive documentation, even if the conclusion was bonkers. I asked what she wanted the police to do. I need you to obtain a warrant to search his apartment for the gravitational manipulation device. Once you seize it, you can test my apartment and see that gravity returns to normal. That will prove my case. I explained that judges don't issue warrants based on the theory that someone is manipulating gravity with non-existent technology. She was ready for this. Then what about the noise? When the device is operating, I can hear a low humming sound coming from his apartment. That's disturbance of the peace, which is illegal. I asked her to describe the humming. It's a low-frequency vibration, almost subsonic. I can feel it in my bones. It usually starts around 10 p.m. and continues until 2 or 3 a.m. Sometimes it pulses, sometimes it's steady. This actually sounded like it could be a legitimate noise complaint, though probably just normal apartment sounds like a refrigerator or fan. I told her I could send an officer to check for noise violations. She practically jumped out of her chair with excitement. Yes, and when your officer is there, they should bring equipment to measure gravitational fields. I have a list of the specific instruments needed. She handed me a typed list that included things like gravimeter with 0.01 milligauss sensitivity, seismometer to detect artificial gravitational waves, and Gauss meter to measure electromagnetic interference patterns. At the bottom, she'd added multiple witnesses who understand advanced physics. I told her the police department didn't have gravity measuring equipment. She seemed genuinely shocked by this. How do you investigate gravitational crimes without proper instruments? This is exactly why he's gotten away with it for so long. The system isn't equipped to handle this type of offense. She then suggested I contact NASA or the physics department at the local university. They'll have the equipment. Tell them it's a matter of public safety. If Leonard can manipulate gravity in my apartment, he could potentially cause people to fall or make things fly around. The danger is immense. I was starting to understand why this woman had come to the police station at 9 a.m. on a Thursday with a homemade gravity detector. I asked if she'd experienced any actual harm from these alleged gravity changes. She rolled up her sleeve to show me a bruise on her elbow. I fell last week because the gravitational pull was 30% weaker in my hallway. I stepped forward expecting normal resistance and instead lurched forward, hitting the wall. That's assault, officer. He's weaponizing physics against me. The bruise was real enough, though it looked like the kind anyone might get from a normal stumble. She had photos of other bruises, scrapes, and what she claimed were gravity-induced injuries from the past 3 months. I've started wearing knee pads and elbow pads in my own home because I never know when the gravity will shift. Do you know how terrifying it is to not trust the basic laws of physics in your own living room? There was genuine distress in her voice, and I felt a pang of sympathy despite the absurdity of her claims. She continued, "Last month, I poured a glass of water and the stream curved slightly to the left as it fell. Water shouldn't curve, officer. That's not how fluid dynamics works under normal gravitational conditions. I have it on video." She showed me the video. The water poured normally. "I've consulted with 3 different online physics forums about this," she said, pulling out printed screenshots. The forums were full of people politely explaining that she was misunderstanding basic physics, but she'd highlighted responses that used technical terms she'd misinterpreted as validation. One person had written, "interesting observation," in a clearly patronizing way, and she'd circled it in red marker as proof that experts agreed with her. Another had suggested she might want to calibrate her equipment, which she took as confirmation that her detector was sophisticated enough to need calibration. Then she dropped another folder on the table, this one labeled Financial Impact. "I've had to purchase multiple gravity detectors, protective gear, and scientific equipment to document this crime. I've spent over $3,000 in the past 3 months. I want Leonard prosecuted, and I want him to pay restitution for the financial burden he's caused me." The receipts were real. Spirit levels, magnets, copper wire, LED lights, digital scales, high-speed camera equipment, and something called a negative ion generator that cost $400. She'd also paid for a structural engineer to examine her apartment ceiling for gravitational stress damage. I asked what the engineer found. He said there was no damage, but that's because he wasn't looking for the right type of stress. Gravitational manipulation doesn't leave the same marks as water damage or settling. He was using outdated assessment methods. I decided to try the empathetic approach. "Margaret, I can see this situation is causing you significant stress. Have you considered that there might be other explanations for what you're experiencing? Maybe inner ear issues causing balance problems or—" She cut me off immediately. "I knew you'd try to gaslight me. That's what Leonard said too. That's what everyone says when they don't want to acknowledge the truth. But I have scientific evidence. I have video documentation. I have measurable data. You can't dismiss physics just because it's inconvenient for your worldview. She pulled out yet another folder. These are statements from other tenants in the building. I've interviewed everyone. I flipped through the pages. Most were polite variations of no comment or I haven't noticed anything unusual. One person had written, please stop knocking on my door about gravity. Margaret had interpreted the lack of corroboration as evidence of a conspiracy. They're afraid to speak up. Leonard has probably threatened them, or maybe he's only targeting me specifically. Davis knocked on the door and gestured for me to step outside. In the hallway, he told me that a Leonard Briggs had just called the station to file a harassment complaint. Says his downstairs neighbor has been banging on his door at all hours, leaving bizarre notes, and he caught her trying to break into his apartment last week with what she claimed was a gravitational emergency. I rubbed my temples. Let me guess. Margaret Finley? Davis nodded. He's on his way in to file a restraining order. Says she's been escalating for months, and he's genuinely scared. I looked back through the window at Margaret, who was arranging her evidence folders in neat stacks, completely convinced of the righteousness of her cause. This is going to be a long day, I muttered. Davis patted my shoulder. Welcome to Thursday. I went back into the room, and Margaret immediately asked if I'd authorized the warrant yet. I explained that a man named Leonard Briggs had filed a complaint against her for harassment. Her face went pale, then red with anger. Of course he did. That's classic perpetrator behavior. He's trying to make me look like the criminal to cover up his own crimes. It's a calculated legal strategy. She pulled out another document. I anticipated this. Here's a timeline showing how his alleged harassment claims perfectly coincide with my documented evidence gathering. He only complained after I got too close to exposing him. The timeline was elaborate, with color-coded entries and cross-references. She'd put more work into this than most detectives put into actual investigations. Every time I knocked on his door to confront him about the gravitational anomalies, he'd threaten to call the police. That's obstruction of justice. He's preventing me from collecting evidence. I asked about the attempted break-in Leonard mentioned. Margaret's expression suggested she thought this was a completely reasonable thing to have done. It wasn't a break-in. I detected a massive gravitational surge at 2 a.m. that was so severe I thought there might be a safety emergency. I was trying to warn him that his device might be malfunctioning, but his door was locked and he wouldn't answer, so I tried to use my credit card to open it. I was acting as a good neighbor, preventing what could have been a catastrophic gravitational implosion. She said this with such conviction that I almost admired the internal logic. Besides, I didn't actually get inside. The lock was too sophisticated, which further proves he has something to hide. Normal people don't need high-security locks. I pointed out that normal people do have regular locks, and trying to pick them is illegal regardless of the motivation. She waved this away. We're getting distracted from the main issue, the gravity manipulation. That's the real crime here. Leonard is trying to flip the narrative to make himself look like the victim, but I have 3 months of documentation that proves otherwise. She tapped the binders. Everything is here. Timestamps, measurements, photographic evidence, video recordings, financial records. This is an airtight case against him. I took a deep breath and explained that what she had was documentation of normal physics that she was misinterpreting. She looked at me with deep disappointment. You're not going to help me, are you? You're going to side with him because his crime is too sophisticated for traditional law enforcement to understand. This is exactly why criminals like Leonard get away with it. The system isn't designed to handle advanced scientific crimes. Leonard arrived at the station 20 minutes later, and I brought him into a separate interview room. He was a slight man in his mid-60s, wearing khakis and a cardigan, looking like someone's kindly grandfather. He seemed exhausted and nervous. Officer, I don't know what to do anymore. Margaret has been harassing me for 3 months. It started with notes under my door about my gravitational device. I thought it was a joke at first. Then she started knocking at all hours, demanding I turn off my gravity machine. I tried talking to her rationally, but she just showed me these bizarre graphs and accused me of lying. He pulled out his own folder of evidence, the notes Margaret had left, timestamps of when she'd knocked on his door, recordings of her shouting through his door about physics crimes. Last week, I woke up at 2 a.m. to her trying to break into my apartment. She was talking to herself about saving me from a gravitational implosion. I'm genuinely frightened. I asked what he did for a living. I'm a retired accountant. I don't know anything about physics beyond high school level. I don't own any unusual equipment. My apartment has a TV, a laptop, normal furniture, and about 200 mystery novels. That's it. He seemed genuinely bewildered by the accusations. I tried to be understanding at first. I thought maybe she was going through something and would eventually get help. But it's gotten worse. She follows me to my car. She's taken pictures of me through my windows. Yesterday, she left a 20-page document in my mailbox explaining her legal case against me for gravitational assault. He showed me the document. It was typed in single space, with footnotes and citations to scientific papers that Margaret had clearly misunderstood. I just want to live in peace. I don't have a gravity machine. I can't manipulate physics. I just want her to leave me alone. I arranged for both of them to come back the next day for a mediation session with a supervisor and a mental health professional. Margaret spent the evening leaving me voicemails with additional evidence she'd forgotten to mention, including something about how the moon's gravitational pull was being amplified through Leonard's device during full moons. Leonard sent an email formally requesting a restraining order, attaching even more documentation of Margaret's harassment. The mental health professional, Dr. Reeves, reviewed Margaret's materials before the meeting and confirmed what I'd suspected. Classic delusional disorder with a focus on physics-based persecution. She's built an elaborate, internally consistent belief system that's impervious to logic or evidence. The level of documentation suggests significant anxiety and obsessive tendencies. She needs psychiatric intervention, not a police investigation. The mediation session the next morning was predictably chaotic. Margaret brought 2 additional binders of evidence she'd compiled overnight. Leonard brought his lawyer. Dr. Reeves tried to gently suggest that Margaret might benefit from speaking to a mental health professional about her concerns. Margaret responded by accusing Dr. Reeves of being scientifically illiterate and possibly in Leonard's pocket. She demanded that we bring in a real physicist who could properly analyze her evidence. When we explained that wasn't how police work or physics worked, she began filming the meeting on her phone, announcing that she was documenting the institutional failure to address gravitational crimes. Leonard looked like he might cry. His lawyer calmly laid out the case for a restraining order, citing specific incidents with dates and times. Margaret interrupted repeatedly, insisting each incident was actually her attempting to gather evidence of ongoing crimes. The breakthrough came when my supervisor, Captain Rhodes, asked Margaret a simple question. What would it take to convince you that gravity in your apartment is normal? She thought about this seriously. Independent testing by a certified physicist using proper gravitational measurement equipment. If someone with credentials and appropriate instruments examined my apartment and found no anomalies, I would accept those findings. Captain Rhodes saw an opportunity. And if we arrange that, will you agree to stop contacting Leonard regardless of the results? Margaret hesitated, then agreed. If a qualified expert finds nothing wrong, I'll accept that I was mistaken, but they have to use real equipment, not just eyeball it. Leonard's lawyer quickly agreed to this arrangement, probably seeing it as the fastest path to getting his client some peace. Captain Rhodes made some calls, and by some miracle, a physics professor from the local university agreed to come assess the situation as a favor to the department. Dr. Patricia Okonkwo arrived that afternoon with a briefcase of actual scientific instruments. She was in her 40s, with an air of professional competence that even Margaret seemed to respect. I understand you've been experiencing what you believe are gravitational anomalies? She asked Margaret kindly. Margaret launched into her full explanation, showing the videos, graphs, and documentation. Dr. Okonkwo listened patiently, asking clarifying questions and examining the homemade gravity detector with genuine interest. This is quite creative, she said, though these components wouldn't actually measure gravitational fields. The magnets respond to magnetic fields, and the compasses detect Earth's magnetic field, but neither would detect changes in gravity. Margaret started to argue, but Dr. Okonkwo held up a hand. However, let's test your apartment properly. I have equipment that can detect even tiny gravitational variations. We all went to Margaret's apartment. Dr. Okonkwo, Captain Rhodes, myself, Leonard, his lawyer, and Margaret. The apartment was surprisingly normal, except for the dozens of handwritten charts taped to the walls, mapping gravitational zones in different rooms. Dr. Okonkwo spent 2 hours conducting tests with various instruments, measuring everything Margaret had claimed was affected. She dropped objects with high-speed cameras recording. She used an actual gravimeter to measure gravitational field strength. She even brought a precision scale to test if objects weighed different amounts in different locations. Margaret watched anxiously, occasionally pointing out times and locations where she'd noticed the strongest anomalies. Leonard stood in the doorway looking uncomfortable, probably wondering how his life had led to this moment. Finally, Dr. Okonkwo packed up her equipment and sat down with Margaret at her kitchen table. I've completed a comprehensive analysis of your apartment using instruments sensitive enough to detect gravitational variations caused by nearby mountains or underground water. I found no anomalies whatsoever. Gravity in your apartment is exactly what we'd expect. A constant 9.07 meters per second squared, with normal minor variations based on your elevation and latitude. Every object I tested fell at the expected rate. Your apartment's gravitational field is completely, utterly normal. She spoke gently but firmly. Margaret's face went through several expressions: disbelief, confusion, then a kind of desperate hope. But what about all my measurements? The videos? The documentation? Dr. Okonkwo smiled sadly. What you've documented is confirmation bias. You expected to see anomalies, so you interpreted normal physics through that lens. The water pouring wrong, normal fluid dynamics, keys falling sideways, normal trajectory that seemed off because you were expecting something different. Your cats jump? Cats are just incredibly good at controlling their momentum. Margaret was quiet for a long moment, staring at her hands. Then she looked up at Leonard, who was still standing in the doorway. I've been wrong? Leonard took a tentative step forward. Margaret, I never had any device. I work normal hours as a night auditor at a hotel downtown. That's why I come and go at odd times. The humming you hear is probably my white noise machine that helps me sleep during the day. I'm just a normal guy trying to live a quiet life. Margaret's eyes filled with tears. I was so certain. I spent so much time on this. I was sure. Dr. Okonkwo put a hand on her shoulder. Your documentation was impressive, truly. You have a methodical mind, but I think you might benefit from talking to someone about why you became so focused on this particular theory. Sometimes our minds can convince us of things that aren't real, especially when we're stressed or anxious. The aftermath took weeks to fully resolve. Margaret agreed to see a psychiatrist and was diagnosed with delusional disorder with obsessive-compulsive features, likely triggered by the stress of Leonard's wind chime complaint the previous year. She started medication and therapy. Leonard agreed not to pursue the restraining order if Margaret agreed to treatment and had no further contact with him. Dr. Okonkwo gave Margaret information about citizen science projects where her obvious talents for detailed observation and documentation could be put to better use, like tracking actual astronomical phenomena. Margaret apologized to Leonard, though it was awkward and painful. I really believed I was protecting myself from something dangerous. I'm sorry I made your life hell. Leonard, to his credit, was gracious. I hope you get the help you need. No hard feelings. 3 months later, I ran into Margaret at a coffee shop. She looked healthier, less manic energy in her movements. She saw me and came over, looking embarrassed. Officer Kowalski, I wanted to thank you for taking me seriously enough to arrange the testing, even though you knew I was wrong. That sounds strange, but having someone actually investigate instead of just dismissing me helped me accept reality. She'd apparently joined an astronomy club and was using her documentation skills to log meteor showers and satellite passes. Turns out I really like systematic observation. I just needed to observe things that were actually happening. She laughed ruefully. My therapist says I was channeling anxiety about losing control in my life into a delusion where I could be the expert, the one who saw what others missed. It's been hard work unpacking all of that. I asked how things were with Leonard. We're cordial now. I brought him apology cookies last month. He was kind about it. Said he understood I was struggling with something beyond my control. I still feel terrible about what I put him through. She sipped her coffee. The weirdest part is looking back at all that documentation and realizing how convinced I was. 3 months of my life dedicated to proving something completely false. My apartment still looks the same. Gravity still works the same. But my entire perception was warped. It's unsettling to realize how wrong you can be while feeling so certain. She showed me her new notebook, filled with neat logs of celestial observations. At least now, when I see something unusual in the sky, I can check online databases and confirm that other people saw it too. That external validation helps keep me grounded, literally. The formal complaint Margaret had tried to file was never processed, obviously, but I kept a copy of her original documentation in my desk drawer, not to mock her, but as a reminder that people can build incredibly elaborate structures of belief on completely false foundations, and they'll defend those structures with everything they have, because admitting they're wrong means admitting they wasted time, money, and energy on nothing. Margaret's gravitational assault case became something of a legend in our department. The story we told to rookie officers about the importance of patience and the thin line between dedicated investigation and delusional obsession. Dr. Okonkwo occasionally asked how Margaret was doing, pleased that her intervention had genuinely helped someone redirect their obvious intelligence toward more productive ends. Leonard moved to a different building 6 months later, not because of lingering issues with Margaret, but because he'd gotten engaged and wanted to start fresh somewhere new. His fiancée apparently found the whole gravity story hilarious once enough time had passed. Margaret sent him a congratulations card, which he told me was actually quite touching, with a sincere note about hoping he'd found happiness and thanking him for his patience during her difficult period. The new tenant in Leonard's old apartment reported no gravitational anomalies whatsoever, though Margaret's replacement downstairs apparently complained about the noise from Leonard's old white noise machine, which the new tenant had inherited. Some things, it seemed, were genuinely just normal apartment life being interpreted through filters of personal annoyance. The university physics department added Margaret's case to their educational materials as an example of how scientific-sounding language can be misapplied by someone experiencing delusions. Dr. Okonkwo gave a lecture titled, When Good Data Collection Goes Wrong, that featured anonymized excerpts from Margaret's documentation. The takeaway was that methodology matters less than whether you're starting from accurate premises, and that elaborate evidence can support completely false conclusions if your initial assumptions are flawed. The lecture was apparently quite popular with students, who found it both entertaining and genuinely educational about the importance of peer review and external validation in scientific work. As for me, I learned to never assume a complaint is too ridiculous to take seriously, at least seriously enough to help the person find appropriate resources. Margaret wasn't a bad person or trying to cause trouble maliciously. She was genuinely suffering from a condition that made her perceive reality incorrectly, and she was trying to solve what she believed was a real problem using the tools available to her. The fact that the problem wasn't real didn't make her distress any less genuine. Sometimes police work isn't about solving crimes, but about connecting people with the help they actually need, even when they think they need something completely different. Margaret thought she needed me to investigate gravitational assault. What she actually needed was psychiatric care, but getting her there required taking her seriously enough that she'd accept help when it was offered. Appreciate you watching this far. If you enjoyed it, drop a like, leave a comment, and subscribe so you won't miss the next story.